Doctors know that drugs called statins lower a person's risk of a stroke due to a blood clot. But a new study shows that the inexpensive medications can also decrease the risk of a first stroke as a result of an intracerebral hemorrhage, the deadliest kind. An intracerebral hemorrhage is when blood from an artery suddenly begins to bleed into the brain. It's the second most common cause of a stroke after a blood clot, which is called an ischemic stroke. Stroke is a leading cause of death and disability in the U.S., the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says. Many can be prevented through lifestyle changes such as eating healthy, getting exercise and quitting smoking. Statins are another powerful tool for stroke prevention. They work by reducing fatty deposits in the arteries and keeping them from building up to cut off blood to the brain. Globally, hundreds of millions of people take them to prevent heart problems or stroke. There has been conflicting research on whether a statin can reduce a person's risk of a first intracerebral hemorrhage. The new study, published Wednesday in the journal Neurology, seems to put a cap on some of that debate. The researchers used prescription data and the health records of more than 88,000 people in Denmark who did not have a history of stroke. During the study period, 989 people had a first bleeding stroke in the lobe area of the brain, and 1,175 had one in the other parts of the brain. The researchers distinguished between lobar versus non-lobar strokes so they could look for differences in strokes in different parts of the brain. Non-lobar strokes are often caused by high blood pressure. The research was partially funded by the Novo Nordisk Foundation. The pharmaceutical company Novo Nordisk makes drugs for the treatment of stroke. But the foundation was not involved in the study design or interpretation of the data, the researchers say. People in the study who used statins for any period of time had a 17% lower risk of a stroke in the lobe areas of the brain and a 16% lower risk of a stroke in the non-lobe areas of the brain. When they used a statin for more than 5 years, they had a 33% lower risk of a bleeding stroke in the lobe areas and a 38% lower risk in the non-lobe areas. It's reassuring news for people taking statins that these medications seem to reduce the risk of bleeding stroke as well as the risk of stroke from blood clots, said study co-author Dr. David Geist, a professor of the University of Southern Denmark in Odense. The study has some limitations, however. It lacked data on potentially important underlying conditions that could lead to a stroke and other information about behaviors that could raise a person's risk, such as smoking or alcohol use. There would also need to be additional research to determine whether the results would be the same in non-European populations. A large ongoing trial funded by the U.S. National Institutes of Health is trying to determine whether people who have been on statins and are admitted to a hospital with a hemorrhagic stroke should keep using the drug or stop taking it. Some research has suggested that people who have a history of stroke due to a blood clot, called an ischemic stroke, may have a higher risk of a hemorrhagic stroke if they take a statin. There were these small exploratory studies off of randomized trials that suggested the possibility there was an increased risk of hemorrhagic stroke if there had been a history of ischemic stroke. So that's thrown us off a bit, said Dr. Pooja Khatri, a professor and division chief of neurology and rehabilitation medicine at the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine. She works regularly with people who have had strokes and was not involved in the new research. She said this study shows what biologically makes sense. Taking statins and keeping fatty deposits from building up in the arteries makes hemorrhagic strokes less likely. Studies like this latest one sort of put the nail in the coffin because they're larger and they're so comprehensive and population-based. This study tells me that if a patient has never had a stroke and they have indications, a statin is definitely a good idea, Khatri said.
Additional items marked classified found in Trump's storage unit. A search for documents carried out at the behest of former President Donald Trump's attorneys turned up 2 documents with classified markings at a Florida storage facility. 2 people familiar with the documents told NBC News. The documents were found recently in a facility not far from Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort and were turned over to the FBI, the sources said, confirming a report published Wednesday in the Washington Post. The find comes almost 4 months after FBI agents executed a search warrant at Trump's Florida residence and found over 100 documents with classification markings, including some that were marked top secret. That search came after the feds issued a subpoena in May demanding the return of any documents marked classified that left the White House with Trump. In June, lawyers for the former president told the Justice Department in a letter that all documents with classification markings had been returned. Trump's lawyers hired an outside firm to conduct searches last month at the storage facility and other locations. The storage unit where the new documents were found was in West Palm Beach. The nature of the documents was not revealed. One of the sources said Trump has never been inside the storage facility. The FBI declined to comment. Representatives for Trump also did not immediately return requests for comment. Trump's office had arranged with the Federal General Services Administration to have 6 pallets of boxes to be moved from a storage facility in Virginia down to West Palm Beach and Mar-a-Lago in July of 2021, GSA emails previously obtained by NBC News show. The pallets were delivered in August of 2021, with 4 going to the storage facility and 2 going to Mar-a-Lago, the emails show. The Justice Department has been conducting what it's described as an active criminal investigation into whether the White House documents found at Mar-a-Lago were mishandled as well as possible obstruction of justice. The discovery of the new documents is further evidence that Trump and his team did not fully comply with a grand jury subpoena issued in May seeking all documents marked classified still in their possession. Trump has denied any wrongdoing and alternatively claimed that the documents were his personal property and that he declassified all the documents that were in his possession.
Sunny Balwani, former Theranos executive, gets nearly 13 years in prison. Ramesh Sunny Balwani, the business partner of disgraced Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes, has been sentenced to nearly 13 years in prison. Balwani was convicted in July of 12 counts of wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud for his role in the failed blood testing startup. Theranos executives falsely claimed the product could diagnose illnesses with a few drops of blood from a finger prick. Holmes was sentenced to over 11 years in prison last month. Balwani did not speak as he was sentenced to 155 months in prison at the end of a nearly 4-hour sentencing hearing on Wednesday. His lawyers say that, like Holmes, he plans to file an appeal. Unlike Holmes, he was also found guilty of defrauding patients who used the blood tests. Holmes was found guilty of 4 counts of fraud. Once hailed as the next Steve Jobs, Holmes launched Theranos after dropping out of Stanford University at age 19. The company's value rose sharply after it claimed it could bring about a revolution in disease diagnosis. Balwani, the company's former president and chief operating officer, served as her second-in-command and had direct oversight over the company's labs. Though the two were originally charged together, their trials were separated after Holmes accused Balwani of emotional and physical abuse during their romantic relationship, which occurred during their time at Theranos. She argued that his alleged manipulation of her was controlling and affected her business decisions. Balwani, who is 19 years her senior, has denied those allegations. Mr. Balwani is not the same as Elizabeth Holmes, his lawyers wrote in a memo to the judge before the sentencing. adding that Holmes was dramatically more culpable for the scam. He actually invested millions of dollars of his own money. He never sought fame or recognition, and he has a long history of quietly giving to those less fortunate. The sentence was read in the same court in San Jose, California, the heart of Silicon Valley, where Holmes was sentenced less than 3 weeks earlier. His trial was sparsely attended compared to Holmes'. For her, the 18th of November sentencing, crowds formed a queue 5 hours before the courthouse opened. But there was no line for Balwani. Theranos' value skyrocketed after the company claimed it could use a small device to process blood samples, an invention they said would mark a revolution in the healthcare world. The company raised millions of dollars from high-profile figures including former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, media magnate Rupert Murdoch, and Oracle co-founder Larry Ellison. But the technology did not work, and the company fell apart in 2018. Prosecutors had recommended that the 57-year-old pay $804 million in restitution and serve a 15-year prison sentence. They argued in court filings that Balwani was an equal participant in the company's false claims about its technology. Balwani's lawyers argued he did not start Theranos and did not have final decision-making power over the company's strategy. The blood testing startup's downfall has been documented in several popular series and podcasts, as well as a book by former Wall Street Journal reporter John Carreiro, who broke the news of the scandal in 2015.